Hello Pixies, and welcome to or back to my channel, and welcome to day 7, the final day of March of the Fairies reading challenge. And today we're not really doing a vloggy type video or an analysis, but we are actually going to be doing a book review. And I know book reviews might not be the most popular thing on BookTube, but I thought it would be a really good idea for this book in particular because I have quite a few thoughts on it, and also I haven't heard anyone talk about it. Now, I will not be spoiling the events of this book, but we are going to be talking in depth about it. But hopefully, if you're still interested in reading this, you won't be feeling like you know everything that happened. We're going to chat about a lot of things about this book, and the book that we are going to be talking about, the book we are reviewing, is The Divine Shallows by Alexandra M. Tran. So without further ado, let's just jump into the review. The Divine Shallows is the first book, and actually Tran's debut novel, and this is supposed to be, according to her website, a 7-book epic romantasy series. The premise of this book is that the Fae in this world worship and are indebted to the moon goddess, and upon people's births, and whether they are magical in nature or royalty, she blesses them with her divine markings. If you are blessed with her divine markings, then you are allowed to participate in her divine trial. However, when one of our main characters, Elira, is born, the moon goddess doesn't give her markings, and she is the princess, and she's supposed to be the crown princess of one of these 7 Fae kingdoms. But because she's scorned at her birth, she goes through a hard life. Her younger sister, when she is born, is then crowned as the next in line for the throne because she was blessed upon her birth. But despite her not having markings, the moon goddess allows her to participate in the divine trial anyways. And the divine trial is this trial that lasts 7 years long, that's in between the Fae realm and the realm of the moon goddess, where every single 7 years is a completely different setup. It's more like a game sort of thing, and no one can see it, but it's very, very important. And if you come out of the trial alive, you are going to be a very powerful sorceress or warlock. And that's kind of the premise of this book. Now, The Divine Shallows, I believe this is a self-published book. There is no publisher on the book anywhere. In the acknowledgments, while she acknowledges the people in her life who helped her make this book, there is no mentions of a publisher or an agent or anything of that nature. So I strongly believe this is self-published, although if I am wrong, please let me know down in the comments below. I'd hate to get it wrong, but from everything I can tell, this is a self-published book, and self-published books come with their own challenges. And I actually discovered this book sometime last year when I was actually scrolling on Pinterest. And what caught my attention on Pinterest is the fact that this cover is one of the best covers I've ever seen. Seriously, look at that. It's honestly breathtaking and so beautiful. And when I read the description of this book, I thought it sounded really, really interesting and something that would be right up my alley. But if you go on Goodreads about this book, it actually has only a little bit over 100 ratings and about 50-something reviews. So this book is really not a very popular book, but it is a debut novel. I didn't really see any marketing around this book or anything, and her website honestly doesn't have much on it. So that could be part of the reason why, because self-publishing comes with the pitfall of you have to market it yourself, and if you don't really market it yourself, you're going to have a hard time finding readers. But now let's get into the actual book itself. And I'm going to start by telling you how I feel about this book as a whole. This book as a whole, I rated a 6 out of 10 because I rate things on a scale of 1 to 10 because I feel like it gives a lot clearer depiction on how I actually feel about this book. And this is a 6 out of 10, which isn't an amazing score, but is also nowhere near being a bad score. I've actually read a book in March of the Fairies that I've rated lower than this out of the ones that I've read so far, and I still kind of enjoyed that book. What really intrigued me was the concept, but honestly, not really a lot happens in this story, because this feels more like a prelude to the entire series, more so than a first book. And I'm saying that because this book is mostly world building and setting up how this society functions. Before the divine trial starts for the next 7 participants for the next 7 years, there is a 7-day period where the participants, each day they go to one of the 7 Fae kingdoms and they have rituals and practices and events that they do every 7 years. And to celebrate the ones who came back from the 7-day trial and to prepare the next 7 trial goers, is that the right word? And this novel mainly takes place in those 7 days. And this book, while it isn't super long, I wouldn't say is short either. It's 379 pages long. A lot of fantasy books that I tend to read tend to be the late 300s to like 500s. So a bit on the shorter side, even though I've definitely read books that are shorter. So it's not spectacularly long, but most of this book really is world building. And so we're just getting all this information about how the 7 kingdoms of the Fae are, how this world was set up, how they came to worship the moon goddess, how this divine trial came about, how every kingdom's power is different. And that's pretty standard, especially in Fae fantasy, is to have a lot of world building and to have kingdoms and different kinds of Fae with different abilities and different physical attributes that make it different. But it's just a lot of world building, so it's kind of like info dumping because we're not even learning about it through the story. We're learning about it in one of our main characters' thoughts, and that is Elowin's thoughts. Because this book, while it's marketed as multiple points of view, it is mostly told in Elowin's perspective in this book. She introduces us to all these characters. She's like, and this is the royal family from this section, and they look like this, and this is their power, and this is their animus, and all these things. And I just don't really think it's necessary for us to know all these things right up front. Like, this is good for an author to have their own notes of what each person does, what their personality is like, what they look like, what their power is, what their animus is. That's all really good to have. And while I don't think this world building was badly written because it wasn't, the world building was interesting, it just wasn't really a story, it was just world building. It would be different if it was told in a different way, right? Like, say that Elowin is looking around when they're all waiting for the 7 Fae to come back from their divine trial, and her eyes just split over the other kingdoms, and she just points out the ones that she finds particularly interesting because they're going to be important to the overall story, like the boy that she starts a relationship with. What he's like and what his family's like, that would be a good detail. But then she can flip over some of the other kingdoms that she doesn't really care as much about because it's just like Jan, she's known them her whole life. She doesn't need to talk about them in detail. Those details, even if you want them, they could come later on in the series because this is supposed to be a 7-book series, and we just don't need all the world building at the front because later on you're going to have to repeat yourself because you can't expect your readers to go back and reread this first book to understand how your world is set up. The world building could have been done through dialogue as well, either with Elira and Elowin talking to each other, or Elowin talking about the boy she becomes interested in, or the character that she becomes friends with over the course of these 7 days during these 7 events. And that would have made a lot of sense. Like, there's lots of books where the world building is done through the dialogue and they are very world building heavy, but it still feels like it's a part of the story because we're getting more character interactions and little things thrown in there, like character and how someone talks and the way someone looks when they're talking about it. And we also can get a feel for the character who is receiving the information. And a series that does that really well through world building through the dialogue is actually The Inheritance Cycle, where that book is that entire series is extremely heavy on the world building, but it's done through the characters, not through just thoughts. I know what they were going for. It's really fun to world build. But it feels like more so this should have been the notes for the author in order to craft a story around it, because books are 50% writer and 50% reader. You don't have to tell everyone verbatim about everything in order for a story to make sense. And you can leave things kind of loose and either address them later or don't. People can fill in the gaps or make exceptions or make their own headcanons. And that's what makes a series really fun to read, is that you don't learn things until later on, but we're just getting a whole bunch of stuff at the beginning that might not really serve a good starting point for the series as a whole. And I don't want it to come across as I'm dogging on this book. I did think it was well written. I had no problems with the actual writing style. It was actually fairly easy to read, even though this person definitely has a style. It could have used another path for the actual story, because there's not actually a lot of story going on. And even though you do have this time frame of 7 days for most of this book, it just doesn't really feel very important. And I think something that could have really benefited this is actually kind of flitting over some of the days and only doing the days that are important, like the first day. That's a really important start point, because that's when the 7 come back. And honestly, where I think this book truly starts is within the last 100 pages, which is during the 6th day of the trial, which is where the 7 for the next trial compete against each other to see who's going to earn the rank of Primus, which means they're going to have the most power when all is said and done. They are the first to enter the trial, and they are the first to come out. And that's a highly coveted thing. And that section, when we get to day 6, that's when the story really takes off. That is truly when the story actually starts. And that's in the last 100 pages. And those last 100 pages were the best part of this book, because the last 100 pages were really, really good, except for a couple things at the end, but I'll touch on that later. The last 100 pages, during the time of the Primus, while you are getting world building stuff and you're getting to know these 7 characters that Elira is about to enter the trial with, and the situation that she's been put through and everything, there's a lot of action. There's world building, there's characters, there's decisions being made, and that's really well done. That's a really, really good action scene. And I was really impressed by it, because action is actually one of the hardest things to write like a scene about. Like, it's really hard to incorporate action and thoughts and things into written form. Like, it's really hard to convey while still being entertaining and intriguing and being on the edge of your seat. And that was done really, really well. And that really impressed me. And that's where the story really should have started. That should have been towards the beginning. I understand if you want to do a little bit before that, but that was truly the start of the book, because it finally felt like we were getting into the actual story and not just the background of the world. And again, the action was written really well, and we really got to see Elira's character, because even though this is multi-perspective, we don't really get Elira till the end. And Elira is a much better character and more interesting character than Elwyn is in this book, because Elwyn, she kind of seems a little bit ditzy and like that she doesn't really care about things, and like understandably they both have kind of had a rough go at their life because of their family situation, but still Elwyn's just kind of a whatever character, and Lyra's the interesting one, but we barely get any Elira compared to how much we get of Elwyn. And I was really impressed by the action scene as well, because earlier on, during one of the other trial days, there is supposedly an action scene. But it felt like more that it was added to be an action scene, because the author realized that there wasn't really a whole lot happening in the book other than world building. And the action wasn't actually written that well, and it kind of downplayed Elira's abilities. It wasn't well written, I wasn't very happy with it, and I thought it was kind of pointless, and I stand by that. It was kind of pointless and unnecessary. Like, that scene wasn't necessary. It didn't really do anything to actually help along the story or reveal things about characters. Like, it did absolutely nothing other than being a kind of bad action scene, which is why I was even more impressed with the end. This entire series and the entire premise is this divine trial, that they're starting the divine trial. but it doesn't really start in this book. Elira and the other 6, they enter through like the Divine Shallows, which is what this is called. They enter through the Divine Shallows to go to this other realm in order to start the trial. That's how this book ends, and with Elira's perspective, and then we get a little tiny bit of Elowen's perspective and how heartbroken she is that she's not going to see her sister for the next 7 years, and also that she has been selected for the next trial, which means she has to train for the next 7 years. And in doing this, so she's basically not really going to see her sister for 14 years other than for a few days in between. And she's really heartbroken, and at the end of this book, she goes to Elira's room, and she finds things that, for us, the reader, is really, really vague, and those things were kind of set up at the beginning when we've gotten a little bit of Elira's perspective. But saying that, Elira has found something out about this world, and not everything is as it seems, and is telling Elowen to remember everything. And while I can see that you're kind of going for a cliffhanger-y, dramatic end, it kind of cheapened the ending a little bit, and it should have ended, if you wanted it to end here, with Elira going into the Divine Shallows. But what it really should have been was a little bit of the first day, and kind of the following days going are a blur to Elowen and Elira, with short snap bits of conversation and being together and action, and then having the 6th day for Primus, and then doing the 7th day where they enter the Divine Shallows, and starting the Divine Trial for Elira, and Elowen being heartbroken for a time, and then starting her training for her Divine Trial. That's 7 years from now. And then it should have gone into the actual Divine Trial, because that is what this whole series is about, and it didn't even start in this book. I understand if you didn't want to show a lot, but then you could have just focused more so on Elowen's perspective and made her interesting and shown the aftermath of these 7 days and the actions that have happened to her in these 7 days, the actually interesting parts, and not shown much of Elira till book 2. That could have been another way to do it. I really don't want to seem like I'm dogging on this book, because I think this is actually a really good start to something that's going to be really special, because it is interesting, the premises are interesting, the action was really well written, and I'm really curious about Elira's story. But I think you could have really had a hit in this beautiful diamond of a book if you had cut the world building a lot and just restructured slightly and had more of a think at the end of the day. I am actually going to be continuing on with the series because I am really interested. There was a lot of interesting things that happened. I loved the end. I loved the action of it. I loved how that was written. I think Elira is a really interesting, cool character. I think Elowen has potential, even though I found her a little bit annoying. And hopefully, since there was a lot of world building in this book, there isn't going to be this level of world building in the second one. If the second one is written in a very similar way to this, where it's a lot of world building, then I won't continue to finish the 7 books. But I'm really willing to give it a chance because I really think that this is interesting and has a lot of potential. And also, this is this person's first book. This is their debut novel. I want to encourage them and tell, if you're watching this, I really do believe in you. I just think you need another pass at your next book when you go to write it. I think you need to have people other than friends or family read it as well, that you need beta readers to really tell you, hey, this is too much world building. Hey, I don't really care about this. Hey, I really want to see more of this because that's interesting and that's the story. And some of these things, they just don't really seem all that necessary when you get down to it. I think I covered everything I wanted to say. Overall, I did enjoy this book, even though I believe it has its faults. But I think it's a really, really promising start to something that could be really, really cool. And I hope this person continues writing this series. That was my thoughts on the Divine Shallows. Please let me know down in the comments if you liked this book review or if you have any questions about the book. I think I covered a lot of things. I covered writing, character, world building, my thoughts on how it could have been better. But if there's something you want to know about this book, leave it down in the comments below and I'll answer your questions to the best of my ability. I hope this wasn't a spoiler-filled review. I didn't really cover the events or what actually happens, so I believe it was. As I said before, I really don't want to come across as that I'm really like being cruel to the author. That's not my intention at all. So I hope you understand that, and let me know if you want to see more book reviews. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. I would really, really appreciate it. And subscribe if you haven't already to see more book content from me. And I guess that's it. So I guess I'm signing off now. Okay, bye.